I am Audrey Wilson, 32 years old, the middle child of the prestigious Wilson family. Thanksgiving dinners started like any other, until Dad dropped the bomb he was selling our three-generation family pharmaceutical company for $50 million to Everest Holdings. My siblings cheered wildly, until he added, I would get nothing. I smiled calmly and asked Dad, who exactly is buying our company? He proudly answered Everest Holdings. I laughed. Dad, I am Everest Holdings. The room went silent. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe to hear how I turn the tables on my family. Wilson Pharmaceuticals was not just a company. It was our legacy, our birthright, our family identity. My grandfather Harold Wilson founded it in his garage back in 1963 with nothing but a chemistry degree and determination. He started by developing a simple cold medication that worked better than anything on the market. By the time my father Robert took over in the 1990s, Wilson Pharmaceuticals had expanded to employ over 200 people and had a respectable market share in over 6 states. I grew up visiting the company headquarters on weekends. While other kids played at parks, I was fascinated by the business meetings, the laboratories, and especially the marketing department. At age 10, I started making mock business plans for the company outlining strategies to expand into new markets. I would proudly present these plans to my father at dinner, only to have him pat me on the head with an amused smile and say, "That is cute, sweetheart, but business is not for little girls." My brother Michael, just 2 years older than me, would receive a completely different reaction when he showed interest. Dad would seriously discuss Michael's ideas no matter how undeveloped they were. "That is my boy," he would say, showing the Wilson business sense already. Our mother Diane was a gentle soul who never contradicted my father. When I would run to her crying about the unfairness, she would simply say, "Your father means well, Audrey. He just wants to protect you from the harsh business world." She never understood that her silence only reinforced the message that I was somehow less capable because I was a girl. My sisters, Jessica and Kimberly, both older than me by 4 and 6 years respectively, showed zero interest in the business. They were content to shop, attend social events, and wait for their trust funds to mature. "Why would you want to work when Dad makes enough for all of us?" Jessica would ask whenever she caught me studying business journals or finance textbooks. Despite the discouragement, I persisted. I applied to Harvard Business School without telling my parents, and when I was accepted with a partial scholarship, my father finally showed a glimmer of pride. "Well, I suppose a business education would help you find a suitable husband in that industry," he said, completely missing the point of my ambition. I graduated with highest honors, earning my MBA with a specialization in pharmaceutical management. My thesis on innovation strategies for family-owned pharmaceutical companies won an industry award. I called my father the moment I received the news, hoping finally for the recognition I had craved all my life. "That is wonderful, Audrey," he said, sounding genuinely pleased. My heart soared momentarily until he continued, "This will look excellent on your resume when you apply for marketing positions. Perhaps even at Wilson Pharmaceuticals, we could use someone with your education in our marketing department." Marketing. Not operations, not strategy, not executive track, just marketing, which, in my father's old-fashioned mind, was where women belonged, creating pretty advertisements rather than making actual business decisions. Still, I swallowed my pride and accepted a junior marketing position at Wilson Pharmaceuticals after graduation. I was determined to prove myself from the inside, to work my way up based on merit rather than family connections. I developed innovative campaigns that increased our market share by 12% in just 6 months. I streamlined the marketing budget, cutting costs while improving results. I even identified a potential acquisition target that would have complemented our product line perfectly. My ideas were consistently attributed to my male colleagues or dismissed entirely. The final straw came during a family meeting 5 years ago. We gathered in the formal dining room of my parents' colonial-style mansion, the same room where years later, the Thanksgiving scene would unfold. I have made a decision about the future of Wilson Pharmaceuticals, my father announced, looking around the table at all of us siblings. Michael will be taking over as Chief Operations Officer next month and will transition to CEO when I retire in 5 years. Michael looked smug. Jessica and Kimberly barely looked up from their phones. I sat there stunned into silence. Dad, I finally managed to say Michael has only worked in the company for 3 years and only in sales. I have been in marketing for 4 years, have an MBA, and have demonstrated measurable improvements to our bottom line. My father's expression hardened. Audrey, this is not up for discussion. Wilson Pharmaceuticals has always been passed down to the eldest son. It is tradition. But traditions change, I argued. Businesses need the best leadership, not just leadership based on gender or birth order. Michael snorted. Come on, sis. You know I have always been groomed for this. You should be happy with marketing. It suits you. The condescension in his voice was unbearable. I looked to my mother, who averted her eyes. Jessica was examining her manicure, and Kimberly was texting furiously, completely disconnected from what was for me a life-altering moment. If that is how you all feel, I said quietly, then perhaps Wilson Pharmaceuticals is not where I belong after all. I submitted my resignation the next day. My father did not try to stop me. In fact, he seemed relieved, as if my ambition had been an inconvenience to his neat traditional world order. As I packed up my office, I made a silent promise to myself. This was not the end of my story with Wilson Pharmaceuticals. One day I would return, and it would be on my terms. Walking away from Wilson Pharmaceuticals felt like tearing off a limb. The company had been my identity, my future, my dream, since childhood. Now I was just Audrey Wilson, unemployed MBA graduate with a chip on her shoulder and something to prove. The first few months were brutal. I sent out dozens of resumes to pharmaceutical companies across the country, but the Wilson name worked against me. Either companies thought I was a spoiled heiress playing at having a career, or they feared hiring me would somehow antagonize my father, who was well connected in the industry. Doors closed before I could even get my foot in. My breakthrough came at an industry conference in Boston. I was attending as a job seeker, nursing a glass of cheap white wine in a corner, when an elderly gentleman approached me. You look like someone with something to say but nowhere to say it, he observed with a kind smile. William Barnes. He introduced himself, extending his hand. My jaw nearly dropped. William Barnes was a legend in the pharmaceutical world, the former CEO of one of the largest drug companies in America before his retirement 5 years earlier. His book on pharmaceutical innovation had been required reading in my MBA program. Audrey Wilson? I replied, shaking his hand. His eyebrows raised slightly. Wilson, as in Wilson Pharmaceuticals. I nodded, bracing myself for the usual assumptions. Instead, he said, I read your thesis. Brilliant work. Shame your father is too traditional to see what he has in you. That single validation from someone of his stature was like oxygen after years of suffocation. We talked for hours, and by the end of the evening, William had offered to mentor me. He saw something in me that my own family had refused to acknowledge: genuine business acumen. Under William's guidance, I began to understand the pharmaceutical industry from a whole new perspective. He introduced me to contacts, recommended reading, and challenged my thinking daily. Most importantly, he believed in me without reservation. The industry needs fresh thinkers like you, he told me during one of our weekly mentoring sessions. Someone who understands both the science and the business side, but also brings compassion to the table. After 6 months of intensive learning, William made me an offer that would change everything. I have $100,000 that I am willing to invest in you, he said. Not as a loan, but as seed capital for whatever venture you want to create. That money became the foundation of Everest Holdings, named for the mountain I felt I had been climbing my entire life. The name also had strategic value. It was generic enough to fly under the radar, giving nothing away about our pharmaceutical focus. I structured Everest as an investment firm specializing in undervalued pharmaceutical companies. My strategy was to look for smaller family-owned businesses, like Wilson Pharmaceuticals, that had good products but outdated business practices. Companies that could thrive with the right leadership and modernization. Our first acquisition was Sanders Pharmaceuticals, a small company in Rhode Island that produced generic antibiotics. The owner was retiring with no succession plan, and the company was at risk of being gutted by a larger competitor. I negotiated a fair price, retained all the employees, and set about modernizing their operations. Within 18 months, Sanders Pharmaceuticals had doubled its revenue and expanded its product line. We sold it for triple our investment, establishing Everest Holdings as a serious player, albeit still a small one. During this time, I met Thomas Henderson, a brilliant financial analyst who became my right hand at Everest. Thomas had worked for one of the pharmaceutical giants, but had grown disillusioned with their focus on profits over patients. Our values aligned perfectly, and he brought complementary skills to the table. "We make a good team," Thomas observed after we successfully completed our second acquisition and turnaround. "You understand the industry and have the vision. I know how to make the numbers work." Not everyone was as supportive. The big pharma players saw our growing success as a threat. They were used to being the only buyers at the table when smaller companies went up for sale, allowing them to dictate terms. Now Everest was offering alternatives, fair deals that preserved jobs and company legacies. "You are making enemies," William warned me during a dinner celebrating our third successful venture. "Powerful ones." "Good," I replied. "If they are noticing us, we must be doing something right." I maintained strict privacy about my role at Everest. In all our dealings, I used legal representatives and never appeared personally in negotiations. The mysterious nature of Everest Holdings became part of our mystique, with industry publications speculating about the unknown visionary behind the company. Only William Thomas and my executive assistant, Lisa Parker, knew the truth. With each success, I was building not just a company, but a war chest. Every profitable deal brought me one step closer to the goal I had never abandoned: returning to Wilson Pharmaceuticals. Not as a junior marketing executive, but as its owner. I kept tabs on my family's company through industry reports and the occasional discreet call to former colleagues. The news was not good. Under Michael's leadership, Wilson Pharmaceuticals was losing market share. His lack of experience, combined with our father's increasingly outdated approach, was slowly driving the company into the ground. 5 years after walking away, I had built Everest Holdings into a company valued at over $300 million. We had a reputation for fair dealings, employee retention, and breathing new life into struggling pharmaceutical businesses. We had expanded beyond simple acquisitions into research partnerships and distribution networks. The pieces were falling into place. I was no longer the desperate daughter seeking approval. I was a force to be reckoned with, and it was almost time to reveal myself to the family that had dismissed me. All I needed was the right opportunity. Building Everest Holdings from nothing into a pharmaceutical powerhouse took everything I had. I worked 16-hour days, 7 days a week, living on coffee and determination. My apartment in Boston became little more than a place to shower and occasionally sleep. My real home was my office, where dreams of success and vindication fueled me through endless nights of work. The growth was methodical but aggressive. After our initial successes with smaller companies, we expanded our strategy. I established a research division that partnered with universities to develop new medications focusing on underserved areas like rare diseases that the bigger companies often ignored because the profit margins were slimmer. "You are not just building a company," William observed during one of our strategy sessions. "You are creating an alternative model for the entire industry." That was exactly my intention. I wanted to prove that pharmaceutical companies could be both profitable and ethical, that treating employees well and putting patients first could be good business. Each acquisition followed this philosophy. We kept staff, improved working conditions, and invested in research rather than just marketing. Thomas became more than just my financial expert. He was my sounding board, my reality check, and often the voice of caution when my ambition pushed me toward too much risk. We complemented each other perfectly in business, and for a brief time I thought perhaps there might be something more between us. "We should keep things professional," Thomas said gently, when I hinted at my feelings during a late-night working session. "Everest is too important to both of us to complicate things." He was right, of course. The company needed our clear-headed partnership more than I needed a romantic relationship. Still, it highlighted how unbalanced my life had become. All work, no personal connections. The one relationship I did attempt during these years was with James Taylor, a lawyer I met at a pharmaceutical conference. He was charming, intelligent, and initially very supportive of my ambitions. 6 months into our relationship, the cracks began to show. "I feel like I am dating Everest Holdings, not Audrey Wilson," he complained after I canceled our weekend plans to handle an emergency with one of our companies. "This is important, James. We are talking about people's livelihoods, medications that patients need." "It is always important," he shot back. "There is always some crisis, some deal, some meeting that cannot wait. When do I get to be important?" We broke up a month later. James wanted a girlfriend who would prioritize him, who would be impressed by his success, rather than focused on her own. I could not be that person. Not when I was building something that mattered so deeply to me. My family remained distant during these years. I attended the obligatory holiday gatherings and occasional family events, but our conversations were superficial. My father and brother never asked about my career, preferring to believe I was playing at business rather than succeeding at it. My sisters continued their socialite lives, married to wealthy men who supported their shopping habits. My mother sent birthday cards and called occasionally, but our relationship had cooled since I had left the family company. None of them knew about Everest Holdings. To them, I was just Audrey, who had failed to accept her proper place in the family hierarchy. I let them believe that, knowing that the reveal would be all the sweeter when the time came. Meanwhile, I kept close tabs on Wilson Pharmaceuticals through industry contacts and publicly available information. The picture was increasingly grim. Michael had launched several product lines that failed spectacularly in the market. He had alienated key distribution partners with his arrogant approach. The company's stock, while not publicly traded, was estimated by industry analysts to have lost nearly 40% of its value in the 5 years since he took over operations. My most valuable source of information was Lisa Parker, my executive assistant who had previously worked at Wilson Pharmaceuticals in the finance department. She maintained friendships with several employees there and provided regular updates on the company's internal struggles. "Your brother fired the entire research team last month," she informed me during one of our weekly briefings. "He said they were not producing results fast enough, but the real issue is cash flow. They cannot afford to keep them on payroll." This was worse than I had thought. The research team had been the heart of Wilson Pharmaceuticals since my grandfather's days. Without them, the company was just a hollow shell distributing increasingly outdated products. "How bad is the financial situation?" I asked. Lisa's expression was grim. "Bad. Rumors are they might miss payroll next quarter if something does not change." That was my cue. If Wilson Pharmaceuticals collapsed completely, there would be nothing left to save. The time had come to make my move. I arranged a meeting with Richard Davis, the attorney who handled all of Everest's major acquisitions. Richard was discreet, brilliant, and utterly loyal. He was also one of the few people who knew my true connection to Wilson Pharmaceuticals. "I want to acquire Wilson Pharmaceuticals," I told him without preamble as we sat in his corner office overlooking Boston Harbor. "But I need it done through intermediaries. No one can know Everest Holdings is the buyer until the deal is closed. Richard raised an eyebrow. Family reunion on your terms. Something like that. He nodded, understanding completely. We can create a shell company for the initial approach. Given their financial situation, they will be eager to deal. What is your offer range? 50 million maximum. That is more than generous given their current valuation and debt load. Richard whistled. That is well above market value. Are you sure about this? I was sure. This wasn't just business. This was personal. This was reclaiming my birthright, saving my grandfather's legacy, and finally proving to my family that they had been wrong about me all along. 2 weeks later, Richard called with news. The approach has been made. Your father seems eager to sell. He has called a family meeting for Thanksgiving to discuss the offer. Thanksgiving? How fitting. A holiday about gratitude and family would become the stage for my greatest triumph. I had much to be thankful for, indeed. My hard work was about to pay off in the most satisfying way possible. Book me a flight to Connecticut, I told Lisa. It is time for a family reunion. The drive to my parents' house in Greenwich, Connecticut felt surreal, like traveling back in time. The sprawling, colonial-style mansion looked exactly the same, right down to the perfectly trimmed hedges and the maple trees lining the circular driveway. I sat in my rental car for a long moment, gathering my composure before walking up the familiar stone path to the front door. 5 years. 5 years of building, planning, and waiting for this moment. I rang the doorbell, the same melodic chime I had heard countless times growing up. My mother answered, her face lighting up with genuine pleasure at seeing me. Audrey, you made it. She embraced me warmly, the scent of her Chanel perfume, instantly transporting me back to childhood. She had aged since I had last seen her at Jessica's baby shower 6 months ago. New lines framed her eyes, and her hair had more silver than I remembered. Of course, Mom. I would not miss Thanksgiving. I returned her hug, feeling a twinge of guilt for the drama I was about to bring to her holiday table, but some reckonings could not be avoided. The house was filled with the traditional smells of Thanksgiving, roasting turkey, cinnamon, and the pine scent of the early Christmas decorations my mother always insisted on putting up the week before Thanksgiving. The formal living room was immaculate, as always, not a cushion out of place on the antique furniture that was more for show than comfort. My father emerged from his study, drink in hand. He had aged more dramatically than my mother. His once robust frame now slightly stooped, his hair entirely silver. Still, he carried himself with the same authoritative presence that had intimidated me as a child. Audrey, he said, offering a stiff embrace. Good to see you. How is the marketing consulting going? He had convinced himself that was what I did, now despite me never actually claiming such a career. Business is excellent, Dad. Better than ever. It was the absolute truth, just not in the way he assumed. Michael and his wife Stephanie arrived next, their twin boys racing through the house with the energy only 5-year-olds possess. My brother looked stressed, deep lines etched between his eyebrows. He gave me a perfunctory hug, his mind clearly elsewhere. Stephanie was warmer, genuinely happy to see me. The boys have been asking about their Aunt Audrey, she said. You should visit more often. Jessica arrived with her husband Greg and their infant daughter. Kimberly came alone, having recently divorced her second husband, in what family gossip suggested was a spectacularly messy split involving his secretary and a yacht in the Bahamas. Still single, Audrey, Kimberly asked as she air-kissed my cheek. I can set you up with Greg's investment banker friend. He makes 7 figures and is only divorced once. I am good, thanks, I replied, forcing a smile. Been focused on work. Work, 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 Jessica chimed in, rolling her eyes. You know there is more to life, right? Like family. She bounced her daughter on her hip, the 4-carat diamond on her finger catching the light. I bit my tongue. In just a few hours, they would understand exactly how seriously I took both work and family. Dinner was served at precisely 4 o'clock, as it had been every Thanksgiving of my life. We gathered around the mahogany dining table that seated 12 comfortably, though we were only 9 adults today. The twins had been relegated to the kitchen with the nanny. The table settings were impeccable, as always, the good china sterling silver, flatware crystal glasses, and the embroidered linen napkins that had been in the family for 3 generations. My mother believed in maintaining traditions, especially ones that showcase the Wilson family prosperity. Before we begin, my father announced, standing at the head of the table with his wine glass raised, "I want to thank you all for being here for what will be a significant family Thanksgiving. We have important matters to discuss today, but first, let us enjoy this beautiful meal Diane has prepared." My mother beamed at the rare compliment, though we all knew the meal had been prepared by her longtime cook, Maria. Still, the planning had been hers, and the table was a testament to her attention to detail. The meal progressed with the usual family dynamics on full display. Michael talked about his country club golf game. Jessica shared every minute detail of her daughter's developmental milestones. Kimberly complained about the settlement negotiations with her ex-husband. My parents nodded and smiled appropriately, while I answered the occasional question about my life in Boston with vague pleasantries. No one asked detailed questions about my work. They had long ago decided that my career was a minor diversion, until I eventually married and settled into a proper socialite role like my sisters. Their disinterest had once hurt me deeply. Today it was an advantage. They had no idea what was coming. As dessert was served a pumpkin pie with homemade whipped cream, my father cleared his throat and tapped his spoon against his water glass. The table fell silent. As you know, Wilson Pharmaceuticals has been facing some challenges in recent years. He began, his voice carefully controlled. The market has changed, competition has increased, and despite Michael's best efforts, we have struggled to maintain our position. Michael stared at his plate, jaw tight. This public acknowledgement of his failure clearly stung. After much consideration and consultation with our financial advisors, I have made the difficult decision to sell the company. A moment of stunned silence followed. Wilson Pharmaceuticals had been in our family for 3 generations. Selling it was unthinkable, or had been. Jessica was the first to recover, to whom? My father's expression brightened. A holding company called Everest Holdings has made a very generous offer. $50 million, which is considerably above the current valuation. I maintained a neutral expression, though my heart was racing. This was the moment I had been working toward for 5 years. 50 million, Kimberly gasped. That is incredible. How will it be distributed? Always about the money, my sisters. Your mother and I will receive 30 million as the primary shareholders, my father explained. Michael will receive 15 million for his shares and his years of service to the company. Jessica and Kimberly will each receive 2.5 million. All eyes turned to me. I raised an eyebrow. And me. My father's expression hardened slightly. Audrey, you chose to leave the company 5 years ago. You have not contributed to its operations or success since then. You hold no shares. So, I get nothing from the sale of our family legacy. I kept my voice, even though I was seething inside at the injustice. Not that I needed the money, but the principle was galling. That is correct, my father confirmed. It is only fair given your choices. Jessica and Kimberly exchanged gleeful looks. Michael looked vaguely uncomfortable, but said nothing in my defense. My mother would not meet my eyes. The sale will be finalized next week, my father continued. The representatives from Everest Holdings have been very professional. They plan to keep the Wilson name and retain most of the staff, which was important to me. How thoughtful of them, I murmured. When do we get our money? Kimberly asked eagerly. My father frowned at her crassness. After the closing. Now, does anyone have any questions about the sale? This was my moment. I set down my fork carefully and smiled. Just one, Dad. Who exactly is behind Everest Holdings? Have you met the owner? No, he admitted. We have been dealing with their attorneys. I understand the owner is very private, but has a strong track record of successful pharmaceutical acquisitions. Fascinating, I said, taking a sip of water. And what research did you do on this company before agreeing to sell our family legacy to them? My father bristled at the implied criticism. Their financials are impeccable. They have the capital. Their reputation in the industry is excellent. It is, I agreed. Everest Holdings is known for turning around struggling pharmaceutical companies, maintaining jobs, and continuing important research that might otherwise be abandoned. Michael frowned at me. How do you know so much about them? I smiled, savoring the moment I had waited 5 long years for. Because, dear brother, I founded Everest Holdings. I built it from nothing into a company that could afford to buy Wilson Pharmaceuticals for $50 million. I am the mysterious owner you have been negotiating with through intermediaries. The silence that followed was absolute. 5 stunned faces stared at me as my words sank in. My father's face drained of color. Michael's mouth opened and closed without sound. My mother's hand flew to her throat in shock. Jessica and Kimberly froze with their wine glasses halfway to their lips. That is not possible, my father finally sputtered. Everest Holdings is worth hundreds of millions. 320 million at last valuation, I confirmed calmly. I have been busy these past 5 years while you all assumed I was failing. You cannot be serious, Michael found his voice. This is some kind of joke. Would you like to call Richard Davis, the attorney you have been working with? He can confirm everything, though the paperwork you signed already has my signature on it if you had bothered to look closely. My father pushed back from the table abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. This is preposterous. You are trying to sabotage the deal with this fantasy. I reached into my purse and withdrew a folder, sliding it across the table to him. These are the incorporation documents for Everest Holdings with me listed as founder and CEO. Also included is a current valuation report from Goldman Sachs and a Wall Street Journal article from last month about the mysterious pharmaceutical innovator revolutionizing the industry. They did not know it was me. Of course, I have kept my identity private until now. My father's hands shook slightly as he opened the folder and scanned the documents. His face grew ashen as the truth became undeniable. But how, he whispered. That, I said, is a very long story. The folder dropped from my father's hands papers, scattering across the polished mahogany table. His face had gone from ashen to mottled red, a vein pulsing dangerously at his temple. This is some kind of trick, he insisted, voice rising. Some kind of manipulation. It is not a trick, Dad, I replied calmly, though my heart was pounding. It is the result of 5 years of strategic planning and hard work. Work you never believed I was capable of. Michael snatched up one of the documents, scanning it with increasingly frantic eyes. This cannot be real. Everest Holdings is. Everyone in the industry has been trying to figure out who is behind it. It cannot be you. Why, I challenged, meeting his gaze steadily. Because I am a woman. Because I am your little sister. Because Dad always told you I belonged in marketing, not leadership. Because you walked away, Michael shouted, slamming his hand on the table. The crystal glasses jumped wine, sloshing over the rims. You abandoned the family business when it got tough. I walked away because I was never given a fair chance, I corrected him. Despite my education, my ideas, my proven results, you were handed the COO position with a fraction of my qualifications simply because you were the son. That is how it has always been done, my father interjected, finding his voice again. The Wilson business passes to the Wilson son. And how has that worked out? I asked quietly. The company is barely staying afloat. You are selling it because you have run it into the ground. My mother gasped. Audrey, that is unfair. Is it? I turned to her. Mom, you know as well as I do that Wilson Pharmaceuticals was thriving until Michael took over operations. The company that Grandpa built that supported this family for 3 generations is now worth a fraction of what it once was. Jessica, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke up. So, what happens to our money? Do we still get our shares from the sale? Of course, that would be her first concern. The deal will proceed as negotiated, I assured her. The only difference is that you now know who is buying the company. So you are really paying $50 million just to prove a point? Kimberly asked incredulously. That seems excessive even for a revenge plot. This is not about revenge, I said firmly. Wilson Pharmaceuticals still has value. The research, the patents, the staff. With proper management, it can be restored. I am not buying it to dismantle it. I am buying it to save it. Save it from what my father demanded. From your outdated leadership and Michael's inexperience, I said bluntly. The company has lost 40% of its market value in 5 years. You have alienated distributors, fired the research team, and failed to adapt to market changes. Another year or two, and there would be nothing left to save. Michael shot to his feet, his face contorted with rage. You have been spying on us, undermining us. This is corporate espionage. It is called industry intelligence, and everything I know came from public information and standard business networking. I replied evenly. Your failures were not exactly a secret in the pharmaceutical world. My father's expression had shifted from anger to something more calculating. If you think this scheme will work, you are mistaken. We can still cancel the sale, find another buyer. You cannot actually, I countered. The agreement you signed includes substantial penalties for backing out. And given the company's financial situation, you cannot afford those penalties. Besides, you will not find another buyer willing to pay $50 million for a company worth perhaps $30 at best. Jessica turned to Kimberly's stage, whispering loud enough for everyone to hear. I always knew Audrey was the smart one. Kimberly nodded vigorously. Totally. So impressive what you have built, sis. We should do lunch soon and catch up. I want to hear all about your company. Their sudden shift from dismissive to sycophantic would have been amusing if it were not so transparent. 5 years of treating me like a failure, and now that I had proven my success, they wanted to claim connection. Audrey, my mother, spoke softly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Why did you not tell us? All this time we thought. You thought what you wanted to think, Mom? I replied, softening my tone slightly for her. None of you ever asked about my work, my success, my life. You all decided I had failed when I left Wilson Pharmaceuticals, and that narrative was more comfortable than considering the alternative. The alternative being that we were wrong, my mother finished quietly. Yes. A heavy silence fell over the table. The pumpkin pie sat forgotten, the whipped cream melting into sad little puddles. The perfect Thanksgiving dinner had become a battlefield of shattered assumptions and bruised egos. My father abruptly stood up. I need some air, he muttered, storming out of the dining room. The front door slammed moments later. Michael glared at me. You did this deliberately, choosing Thanksgiving, the family gathering, to humiliate us. I chose nothing, I replied. Dad set the meeting date. I simply showed up as invited. You could have told us privately before it came to this, he insisted. Would you have believed me? Or would you have dismissed it as another of Audrey's desperate attempts to prove herself? He had no answer for that. I stood up from the table. I need some air too. Excuse me. I walked out to the back patio, the night air crisp with the promise of winter. The garden lights illuminated the carefully landscaped yard where I had played as a child, dreaming of one day running the family business. Those dreams had come true, just not in the way I had imagined. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A text from Thomas, documents all in order. Ready for signatures Monday. How did the reveal go? I typed back, explosive. We'll call later with details. As I slipped the phone back into my pocket, I heard the patio door open behind me. I turned, expecting to see my mother, but it was my father who stepped out into the night. My father looked smaller somehow, standing there in the patio lights. His shoulders, always so square and imposing in my childhood memories, were slumped. The man who had loomed so large in my life, whose approval I had desperately sought for decades, suddenly seemed diminished. $50 million, he said, quietly, walking to stand beside me at the stone balustrade. That is a lot of money to spend on a point of principle. It is not about the money, I replied. It never was. Then what is it about, Audrey? Revenge, showing up your old man and your brother, proving you were right all along? I considered his questions carefully before answering. Partly yes, I wanted to prove myself, but mostly I wanted to save Grandpa's legacy. Wilson Pharmaceuticals deserves better than to be run into the ground because of outdated thinking about who should lead it. He winced at that, but did not argue. Progress of a sort. How did you do it? He asked after a moment. Build a company that size in just 5 years. For the first time in my adult life, I heard genuine curiosity in my father's voice when he spoke about my work. No condescension, no dismissal. Just a businessman asking another businessman, or businesswoman in this case, how she had achieved success. I told him about meeting William Barnes, about the seed money, about the strategy of acquiring undervalued pharmaceutical companies and revitalizing them. I explained how we had expanded into research partnerships and distribution networks. I described the team I had built, the company culture I had created. He listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Your grandfather would have been proud, he finally said. He was an innovator too, never satisfied with the status quo. I suppose I lost that somewhere along the way. Became too focused on tradition, on doing things the way they had always been done. Why? I asked, genuinely curious. Grandpa built the company from nothing. He did not follow anyone's tradition. My father sighed heavily, looking out over the garden. Fear, I suppose. When your grandfather handed the company to me, it was already successful. I was terrified of being the one to ruin it. Following his playbook seemed safer than creating my own. And then you expected Michael to follow yours? Yes. He ran a hand through his silver hair. I never gave him the chance to develop his own leadership style either. Just expected him to be a carbon copy of me, the way I tried to be a copy of my father. This level of self-awareness from my father was unprecedented. I had never heard him admit to fear or doubt before. Why did you not believe in me? I asked the question that had driven me for years, finally escaping my lips. Was it really just because I am a woman? He flinched. Not entirely. You were always so different, questioning everything, challenging traditions. It scared me. Michael was easier. He accepted the way things were. You never did. That is not a flaw, Dad. Innovation requires questioning the status quo. I see that now. He turned to face me directly. Too late, it seems. It is not too late, I said. The company can still be saved. Under your leadership, not mine. Yes, I acknowledged. But that does not mean there is no place for your experience, for your knowledge of the company's history. A flicker of hope crossed his face, quickly suppressed. You would want my input after everything. Business is business, I said. Personal feelings aside, you know things about Wilson Pharmaceuticals that could be valuable. I would be foolish to discard that resource out of pride or resentment. The patio door opened again, and Michael stepped out. His earlier rage seemed to have subsided, replaced by a defeated weariness. The great prodigal daughter returns triumphant, he said, but there was no bite in his words. I guess I should congratulate you. Michael, my father began, but I held up a hand. It is okay, I told my father, then turned to my brother. I did not do this to humiliate you, Michael. I did it because Wilson Pharmaceuticals matters to me. It has always mattered to me. I know, he admitted, surprising me. I always knew how much you cared about the company. That is part of why I resented you so much. Your ideas were always better than mine, your commitment deeper. It was easier to dismiss you than to compete with you. This confession, so unexpected, momentarily robbed me of words. I failed. Michael continued when I did not speak. I thought running the company would be easy. Just follow Dad's example, stick to what worked before. But the market changed, competitors changed, everything changed. I was not prepared. Few people would be without proper mentoring and guidance, I said. Dad set you up to follow his playbook, but the game had changed. Michael nodded, glancing at our father. No offense, Dad. None taken, my father replied. Audrey is right. I failed both of you in different ways. The three of us stood there in the crisp November air, the weight of decades of misunderstanding and missed opportunities hanging between us. Then remarkably, my father laughed, a short, rueful sound. What, I asked? $320 million, he said, shaking his head in wonder. My daughter built a company worth $320 million in 5 years. Whatever else has happened, that is something to be proud of. I am proud of you, Audrey. I should have said that a long time ago. Those words, so long desired and never expected, washed over me like a healing balm. I had told myself I had moved beyond needing my father's approval, that I had built Everest Holdings for myself, not for him. But hearing those words still mattered more than I had allowed myself to believe. Thank you, I said. Simply knowing anything more would choke me with emotion. What happens now? Michael asked. With the company? With all of us. Now, I said, we go back inside and have a real family conversation about the future. One where everyone's voice is heard. We returned to the dining room, where my mother, Jessica, and Kimberly waited anxiously. The atmosphere had transformed entirely from the tense, shocked silence of earlier. My mother's eyes were red-rimmed but dry. Jessica and Kimberly watched us, cautiously unsure what to expect. Audrey has something to say, my father announced, taking his seat at the head of the table. All eyes turned to me. 5 years ago, I would have shrunk under such scrutiny from my family. Now I stood tall, confident in who I was and what I had built. Wilson Pharmaceuticals will continue, I began. The name, the legacy, the core mission that Grandpa established. But there will be changes, necessary ones to ensure the company survives and thrives in today's market. I outlined my vision, keeping the current staff, but bringing in some key people from Everest Holdings to modernize operations, reestablishing the research department that Michael had disbanded, creating new product lines while maintaining the quality and reliability of our established medications. Michael, I turned to my brother. You know the company's operations better than anyone. There is a place for you in the new structure if you want it. Not as CEO, but as Chief Operating Officer with proper support and mentoring this time. He looked surprised, then thoughtful. You would still want me involved, even after everything. Family is complicated, I said. Business is business. You have knowledge and relationships that are valuable. I would be foolish to discard that out of pride. My father nodded approvingly. I continued addressing each family member in turn. Dad, your experience and institutional knowledge would be valuable in an advisory capacity. A board position, perhaps, where your wisdom can guide without controlling. Mom, the charitable foundation attached to Wilson Pharmaceuticals has been neglected lately. Your social connections and organizational skills would make you an excellent director for that arm of the company if you are interested. My mother's face lit up. She had always enjoyed the charitable aspects of our family business, but had been kept at arm's length from any real responsibility. I turned to my sisters. Jessica, Kimberly, I will be honest. I do not see roles for you in the company, unless you genuinely want to work and contribute. The days of drawing salaries for doing nothing are over. However, the money from the sale will be distributed as Dad outlined. What you do with your shares is your choice. They exchanged glances, for once speechless. So that is my proposal, I concluded. A new Wilson Pharmaceuticals built on the foundation of the old, but adapted for the future. A true family business where contribution is valued over tradition or gender. The silence that followed was not the shocked, stunned silence of earlier. It was thoughtful, contemplative. I had given them all something to consider, a path forward that acknowledged the past without being bound by it. My father was the first to respond. I think he said slowly, that is a fair and generous proposal. More than fair given the circumstances. One by one, the others nodded their agreement. Even Jessica and Kimberly, while clearly disappointed that the gravy train of unearned salaries was ending, seemed to recognize the reasonableness of my position. To the new Wilson Pharmaceuticals, my father said, raising his wine glass, and to Audrey, who reminded us what innovation and determination can accomplish. We all raised our glasses, the traditional Thanksgiving dessert, forgotten, amid the more important feast of truth and reconciliation that had been served instead. 1 year later, we gathered again around the same Thanksgiving table. The china was the same, the silver polished to a high shine, the linen napkins precisely folded, but everything else had changed. Wilson Everest Pharmaceuticals, as we had renamed the company to honor both its past and its future, had not merely survived but thrived under its new leadership structure. The stock value had increased by 60%. We had launched 2 new medications, rehired the research team with expanded funding, and restored relationships with key distributors. I divided my time between Boston and Connecticut, now maintaining oversight of both Everest Holdings and our newly acquired Wilson branch. Thomas had stepped up to handle more of the day-to-day operations at Everest, proving himself an even more capable executive than I had realized. William Barnes, my mentor, and the man who had made it all possible, with his initial investment and guidance, sat at our table today as an honored guest. At 82, his mind was still sharp, his insights valuable. He had become something of a grandfather figure to me, filling a void left when my own grandfather passed away before I was old enough to really know him. To think, he said, raising his glass during the toast, that my $100,000 turned into all this, best investment I ever made. My father, seated opposite William, nodded in agreement. The best decision I never wanted to make was selling to Audrey, he admitted with a rueful smile. Sometimes the right path finds you, even when you are determined to avoid it. My father had settled comfortably into his advisory role on the board. After decades of carrying the full weight of the company on his shoulders, he seemed almost relieved to contribute his wisdom without the burden of final decision-making. He and I had developed a new relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than patriarchal authority. We still disagreed sometimes, often vigorously, but those disagreements were now productive rather than dismissive. Michael had surprised everyone, perhaps even himself, by flourishing in his reconfigured role as COO. Without the pressure of trying to fill our father's shoes exactly, he had discovered his own leadership style. He had a talent for team building that had previously been suppressed by his attempts to project our father's more authoritarian approach. The quarterly numbers are the best we have seen in a decade, he reported proudly during dinner conversation. The restructuring of the sales territories you suggested is paying off dramatically. My mother had transformed the Wilson Pharmaceutical Foundation from a tax write-off that occasionally sponsored charity galas into a meaningful force for good. She had established a patient assistance program that helped those who could not afford their medications and a scholarship for women pursuing degrees in pharmaceutical sciences. We have selected our first 5 scholarship recipients, she announced. All brilliant young women who remind me very much of you at that age, Audrey. Even Jessica and Kimberly had evolved in their own ways. Jessica had used her share of the sale money to open a boutique, discovering an unexpected talent for retail management. Kimberly had returned to school to finish the degree she had abandoned when she married her first husband, studying interior design with genuine passion. As we finished the main course and prepared for dessert, I caught my reflection in the ornate mirror hanging on the dining room wall. I looked different, too. The sharp edges of ambition and resentment had softened. The constant need to prove myself had eased. Success had not changed my drive or determination, but it had allowed me to temper them with compassion and perspective. "Before we have dessert," my father said, setting down his napkin, "I want to say something." He cleared his throat, showing rare emotion. "A year ago, we sat at this table and experienced what can only be described as a seismic shift in our family dynamics. Audrey revealed herself not just as a successful businesswoman, but as our company's savior. I started to protest, but he held up a hand. Let me finish. This past year has been one of profound learning for me. I realized that my greatest failure as a businessman was not some strategic error or missed opportunity. It was my blindness to the talent right in front of me because it came in a package I did not expect or value properly." The table was silent, everyone giving him the space to continue. "I was raised with certain ideas about family, about business, about the roles of men and women. Those ideas served me poorly, and they served my family and company even worse. If I had recognized and nurtured Audrey's talents from the beginning, Wilson Pharmaceuticals would never have needed saving in the first place." My mother reached over and squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with tears and pride. "The lesson I have learned, that I hope we have all learned," my father continued, "is that true legacy is not about bloodlines or traditions or doing things the way they have always been done. True legacy is about recognizing value wherever it appears, nurturing talent in whatever form it takes, and having the courage to evolve when the world demands it." He raised his glass. "To Audrey, who had the courage to leave in order to save what she loved, and to all of us, for having the wisdom eventually to recognize the gift we were given." As glasses clinked around the table, I felt a sense of completion I had never expected. The circle that had broken 5 years ago when I walked away from Wilson Pharmaceuticals had not merely closed. It had expanded to include new possibilities, new connections, new understanding. The journey from that heartbroken young woman, determined to prove herself to the confident executive who could buy her family's company, had transformed me in ways I was still discovering. The victory had been sweet, yes, but the reconciliation was sweeter. Not because I needed their approval anymore, but because healing was better than harboring resentment. "I have something to add," I said as the toast concluded. "A year ago, I thought this was the end of a story, the triumphant conclusion of my plan to prove myself and save the family legacy. But I have realized it was actually just the beginning of a new chapter, for all of us." I looked around at the faces of my family, seeing them with new eyes. Not as the people who had doubted and dismissed me, but as flawed, complex individuals capable of growth and change, just as I was. The real lesson for me has been that success means nothing if you achieve it alone. Building Everest Holdings showed me I could succeed without my family's support. But rebuilding Wilson Pharmaceuticals with all of you has shown me that success is richer when shared even with the people who once hurt you. My mother wiped away a tear. Michael nodded thoughtfully. Even Jessica and Kimberly seemed touched by the sentiment. The most powerful choice we can make is not between success and failure. I continued finding the words for the understanding that had been growing in me over the past year. It is between bitterness and forgiveness, between holding on to past hurts and creating space for new possibilities. I raised my glass one final time. To new beginnings built on the foundations of the past, but not limited by them, and to the wisdom to know which traditions to honor and which ones to leave behind. As we enjoyed pumpkin pie and coffee, the conversation flowing easily around topics that would have been landmines a year earlier, I reflected on how far we had all come, not just in terms of business success or financial security, but in our capacity to see and hear each other, to recognize value in unexpected places, to evolve beyond the limitations of our own assumptions. That perhaps was the greatest achievement of all. Not the $50 million acquisition or the $300 million company I had built, but the transformation of a family that had been bound by rigid traditions into one that could grow, adapt, and thrive together. What about you? Have you ever had to walk away from something you loved to find your own path, or had to prove yourself to people who underestimated you? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to hear more stories of triumph over adversity. And remember, sometimes the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the courage to forge our own path even when others doubt us. Thank you for listening, and may your own journey lead you to both success and healing.